No one opened their doors when she walked through town. Not when she limped, not when her ribs showed through her golden fur, and certainly not when her puppies cried in the heat. She was just another stray, just another burden, dragging two starving lives behind her. But when she collapsed on the doorstep of a woman who hadn't touched a dog in 20 years, everything changed. What happened next didn't just save a family, it woke up an entire town. In Sundale, Texas, July didn't feel like summer. It felt like punishment. The sun scorched the town from a pale, empty sky, baking the cracked earth until it blistered. Wind blew only to move dust, not cool the skin. The air stung like grit in the eyes, and even the trees, what few remained, held their branches up like dried-out hands begging for shade that never came. Sundale was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It was the silence of something that had been forgotten, something that had given up. Porches sagged, yards browned, fences leaned. Every window seemed to squint in suspicion. No one waved anymore. No one sat on the stoop with a glass of tea and a smile. The town had grown still, still and hard. And into this stillness came something moving, barely. She looked like a ghost with golden fur, except that her coat, once glossy and proud, was now the color of dried clay and tangled with burrs, dirt, and dried blood. Her ribs stretched her sides, each step a rattle. Her tongue lolled from her mouth, dry and cracked. Her paws, especially the back left, were torn, leaving tiny dots of red in the dirt behind her. She was a golden retriever by breed, but whatever dignity came with that name had long since been stripped away. Her name had once been Luna. Behind her trailed two shadows on four shaky legs. The first was a boy, Sonny, only 8 weeks old, but walking as if he had already seen a lifetime. His light cream fur was caked in dust. One of his back legs trembled with every step, never quite landing right. Still, he tried to wag his tail each time his mother looked back, as if that small motion might bring her strength. Beside him was his sister, Daisy, smaller, quieter, and never far from Luna's side. Her golden fur was darker, but no less dirty. She walked low to the ground, her belly nearly brushing the dirt, as if the world might rise up to crush her at any moment. Every now and then, she licked her mother's leg, gentle, almost desperate, trying to comfort someone she didn't fully understand was in pain. They had been walking for hours, maybe longer, past shuttered shops, past broken benches, past people who saw them but chose not to see. At one porch, a woman in a floral robe leaned out to shake crumbs from a towel. She spotted the dogs and paused. Her name was Mrs. Delaney, late 50s, wide-shouldered, with hair dyed too black and lips always pursed in disapproval. She clicked her tongue. "Filthy things," she muttered and slammed her door. Luna didn't react. She kept walking, not out of hope, but because she didn't know how to stop. Her eyes scanned for shade, a place to lie down, a place to be forgotten, but not in the heat. Sonny stumbled behind her and gave a tiny whimper. His legs were beginning to falter. Daisy bumped against him, steadying his side with her tiny body. It was a small thing, but in that moment, it mattered more than anything. They reached a street with no name left on its rusted sign. The buildings here were older, more broken. One house had half its roof missing. Another leaned so far to the left it looked drunk. And then Luna saw it. At the far end of the road stood a chapel, small, white, silent. Its paint had peeled in long curls. The wooden cross above the door hung crooked, one beam barely attached. The windows were cloudy, like the eyes of someone too old to cry anymore. No candles, no hymns, only heat and shadow. But for Luna, it was enough. She limped toward it, breathing in short, shallow bursts. Her legs trembled. Her paw left a smear of blood with every step. The puppies followed, no longer playful, just obedient. At the base of the chapel steps, Luna hesitated. The shadow on the porch stretched out like an invitation. And then, her legs gave out. She crumpled forward with a heavy, breathless sound, landing on her side. Her chest rose once, then again, barely. Sonny let out a quiet yip and curled into the crook of her belly. Daisy pressed her face to her mother's paw and closed her eyes. The sun beat down. The wind stirred dust in little useless circles. No one came. No one looked. Except for one. Behind the curtain of a pale yellow house just across the street, a small hand gripped the window frame. And behind that curtain stood a pair of wide, silent eyes. She was 10 years old. Her name was Lily. Lily didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until she heard it. It wasn't a growl or a whimper or even a cry. It was a sound so faint it almost disappeared into the dry wind. A single breathless bark. Not from the mother. From the pup. The cream-colored one with the hurt leg. His voice cracked like paper rubbed raw. But it reached her. It was the kind of sound that slips through all the noise of the world and goes straight to where the heart remembers how to ache. She let go of the curtain and turned on her heel, bare feet pattering across the wooden floor. "Grandma," she called, her voice trembling now. "There's a dog outside. 3 of them. One just barked. She's not moving. Please, you have to come." Margaret Taylor was in the kitchen, her back to the window, rinsing out a glass with deliberate slowness. She had sharp angles in her face, a tall frame that had once turned heads, now softened by age and ache. Her silver hair was pinned tightly in place, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The kitchen smelled faintly of lavender and old lemon oil. She didn't turn around. "Strays," she said flatly. "They'll be gone by tomorrow." "No," Lily insisted, now pulling at her grandmother's shirt. She collapsed. "The puppies are curled into her. They're so small. Please, just look." Margaret sighed. There was exhaustion in her bones, not from work, but from memory. 5 years ago, she had buried her only child. He'd died trying to save a dog, ran into traffic to lift it off the road. It had been raining. A truck didn't stop in time. Margaret hadn't touched a dog since, hadn't even looked one in the eye. She let people think she'd become cold. It was easier than explaining what grief did when it sat too long in the corners of your soul. Still, something in Lily's voice, urgent, trembling, cut through the fog. She set the glass down, dried her hands, and followed the child to the front window. Across the road, beneath the shadow of the derelict chapel, lay the dog. Margaret didn't say a word. She narrowed her eyes, her fingers curling slightly against the window pane. The retriever was on her side, unmoving, her body stretched out along the step like an offering. The puppies were pressed close. One lifted its head, the same one that had barked. He looked straight toward the house. Margaret inhaled, and her hands began to tremble. Lily saw it. "Please," she whispered. Margaret nodded once, tight. "Get the blue towel from the back room, the thick one, and the old tin water bowl from the porch. Bring both to the sink." Lily vanished in a flash of braids and bare feet. Margaret walked to the pantry with a steadiness that surprised even her. She opened a drawer and reached into the back where she hadn't touched in years. There lay a small wooden box, its hinges worn, the scent of dried herbs still clinging to the inside. She pulled it open and stared at the contents. Gauze, a strip of vet tape, an old salve made from pine resin and crushed rosemary, her grandmother's recipe. The same one she had once used to heal a stray raccoon. A broken-winged owl, her son's first dog. By the time Lily returned, Margaret already had the supplies laid out on the table. They stepped outside together. The sun hit them like a slap. The dirt beneath their feet crackled. The wind stirred the hair around Lily's face. Across the street, the chapel stood silent as ever, the cross still leaning like it was too tired to believe anymore. But on the porch steps, there was movement. The golden pup was trying to stand. He pushed against his mother's side, licking her ear, his body wobbling with the effort. The other pup remained curled up, barely visible under the crook of her neck. Luna didn't move. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow. They crossed the street. Margaret kept her pace slow. Each step brought her closer to the thing she had spent 5 years avoiding. Her jaw clenched, her eyes burned. When they reached the steps, Lily knelt first. "Hey," she whispered. "It's okay. We're gonna help." The male pup, Sonny, looked up and gave another broken bark, quieter than the last. But this time, it wasn't hopeless. It was pleading. Margaret crouched beside the mother. Her fingers hovered just above Luna's side, then made contact. Heat, fever. The body was too thin, the breathing ragged, but she was alive. Just barely. "She's holding on," Margaret murmured. She looked at the pups. "These two, they're fighters." Lily's eyes welled. "What do? We bring them inside." They wrapped the pups first, Sunny in the towel, Daisy in Lily's arms, small and still like a forgotten toy. Then Margaret reached for Luna. The dog didn't resist. She didn't have the strength. But as Margaret lifted her, she felt a flicker, something almost like recognition. Not of her, perhaps, but of being held again, of hands that did not harm. It took both of them to get her across the street. The town remained still. No one came out. No curtains moved. But something had shifted. The front door opened with a creak. Margaret stepped inside first, laid Luna gently on the faded rug beside the living room chair. Lily brought the pups over and placed them on a folded quilt nearby. Margaret looked down at the scene, the mother and her babies, broken but breathing, and something in her finally gave way. She knelt, opened the salve, took a clean cloth and began to clean the wounds. Lily sat beside her, silent, watching. No one spoke. But for the first time in 5 years, Margaret's house was no longer empty. The sun had begun to drop behind the cottonwoods, casting long, stretching shadows across the front porch of the Taylor house. Inside, the scent of dust was slowly being replaced by something warmer: wood smoke, mint, and memory. Margaret crouched in the narrow hallway closet, the light above her flickering slightly as she reached past boxes of old blankets and canned peaches to where a heavy cedar chest sat tucked against the back wall. Its lid creaked when she opened it, the hinges stiff from disuse. Inside were linens wrapped in thyme and a small wooden tray that smelled of pine, camphor, and distant summers. She lifted it carefully. Jars labeled in her mother's spidery handwriting clinked softly against each other. Dried strips of cinnamon bark, bits of walnut husk ash folded into waxed paper, and a sealed tin of raw forest honey. Thick and dark, gathered back when hives still stood on the edge of her childhood fence line. Her mother had once treated every stray in Sundale, back when the town still had strays worth caring for. Margaret had watched, once, learned. She just hadn't touched any of it in over 5 years. She brought the tray into the living room, where the lights were now dimmed low. The windows remained cracked open just enough for the evening breeze to pass through, gently stirring the edges of the quilt Luna lay on. The golden retriever still hadn't lifted her head, but her sides rose and fell in slow, uneven rhythm. Her breathing sounded like wind caught in a paper bag. Thin, untrustworthy. One paw twitched. Beside her, the puppies had been placed on a folded towel warmed near the fire. Lily sat beside them, legs tucked under her, watching their every movement as if her stillness might help them heal. Sunny had begun to stretch his legs in tiny, awkward motions. His tail gave a faint, unconscious flick. Daisy remained curled tight, but had shifted slightly, her tiny nose brushing her mother's ribs. Margaret knelt beside the dog. Her knees cracked audibly as they hit the floor, but she said nothing. She mixed the cinnamon bark with warm water, stirred in the honey until it melted into the liquid, then used a cloth to dab at the dog's cracked paw pads. She sprinkled crushed mint over the bandages, the same way her mother had taught her when treating a mule's infection during a long drought in '63. Luna didn't flinch. The skin around Margaret's eyes tightened. "Still with us," she murmured. Lily handed her the next jar wordlessly. Margaret opened it. Walnut ash mixed with rosemary oil. She began dabbing the salve gently across Luna's legs, over small scrapes in places where the fur had pulled away to reveal raw skin. The scent filled the room, smoky and herbal. "She's not cold anymore," Lily whispered. "She's fighting," Margaret said, "but it's going to take all night." Outside, the wind picked up. The trees whispered against the window panes, the kind of breeze that carried old stories if you listened hard enough. They worked in silence for nearly an hour. The pups occasionally shifted. Sunny's breathing steadied, his eyes blinking slowly open once or twice. Daisy let out a single feather-light squeak, then settled deeper into the warmth of the towel. The fire crackled in the corner, embers glowing orange and red. Margaret moved slowly but with purpose, her hands remembering the rhythm even if her heart still hesitated. There was something fragile in her chest, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. It frightened her, that soft ache, but she didn't pull away from it. Not tonight. The front door opened with a slight creak. A gust of cooler air swept through. Lily looked up, startled, but it was only the draft. She crossed the room and closed it again. Then she paused at the shelf near the door, pulled down a photo frame that had been turned face down for months, and quietly set it upright. It was a picture of a young man, mid-20s, tan, bright-eyed, holding a wriggling puppy in his arms. He had dark brown hair, a cleft in his chin, and a smile that pushed up his cheeks into boyish dimples. Behind him stood Margaret, 10 years younger, laughing. Her hand was on his shoulder. Lily touched the glass. "I remember this day," she said softly. "He let me name the puppy. I called him Waffles." Margaret looked up from the bandage she was tying. Her face was still, but her eyes flicked toward the photo. "You were only 5. "I remember how he laughed," Lily said. "So did I," Margaret said. Her voice cracked. The room fell quiet again, but the air was different. Less heavy, less guarded. As the fire dimmed into coals, Margaret reached into the cedar chest one last time and pulled out a bundle of dried leaves, wrapped in cloth and tied with red thread. "What's that?" Lily asked. "Silverleaf," Margaret said, "and elderflower. Your great-grandmother's last recipe for inflammation. We'll make tea for her in the morning, if she's strong enough." Lily nodded solemnly, her gaze drifting to the quilt. Luna stirred. It was the smallest movement, her paw flexing, her eyes half open, her tail twitching once. Margaret leaned in. "Easy now." Luna's gaze wandered, glassy and unsure. She blinked slowly, then locked eyes with Lily. Just for a second. Then her tail moved again. It wasn't a full wag, just a shift of air. But it was enough. Lily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "She saw me?" "She did," Margaret whispered. Luna closed her eyes, but her breathing came a little deeper now. "She's going to try," Margaret said. "She hasn't given up yet." They stayed there long into the night, two people who had lost too much, watching over 3 lives that had nearly slipped away. The fire burned low, the wind quieted, and the old house that hadn't heard soft voices in years was filled with them again. On the far end of Sundale's main road, past the overgrown ditch and the abandoned grain silo, sat a small house with warped siding and a tin roof that popped and creaked under the changing air. The yard had not been mowed in years, and the gate sagged inward like a tired spine. Inside that house, in a narrow room filled with dust and shadows, an old man stirred from his chair as the wind changed direction. Henry Doyle, 70 years old, stood tall for his age, though his back carried the weight of years in the form of a slight stoop. His shoulders were broad, but sloped now, his joints stiff. His skin was rough and deeply lined from decades under the sun. Thick white hair curled above his collar, and his beard, trimmed but no longer neatly, matched the hair in both color and stubbornness. His eyes were gray, almost silver, but dulled from time and silence. He wore a faded flannel shirt tucked into worn denim jeans, and an old belt with a brass buckle that had belonged to his father. Henry had been a man of the land once, worked Boone Ranch when it still meant something, raised herding dogs, taught them to run cattle, to guard, to listen better than most people. Then the flood came, then the silence. He moved slowly toward a battered wooden cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. The lock had rusted, but the key still hung from a nail beneath the calendar, marked 2009. He turned it gently, and the latch clicked with a dry, reluctant sound. Inside, folded blankets and a thick leather-bound book leaned beside a cedar box that carried more weight than its size suggested. Henry sat down with the box in his lap, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. The smell of cedar, old paper, and tobacco drifted upward. Inside were black and white photographs, brittle and curling at the edges. He lifted one and stared at it without blinking. In the photo, 5 men stood in front of a wooden barn, the original Boone Ranch headquarters. Each wore a cowboy hat, their boots caked with mud. But it was the bottom corner of the image that held his gaze. A dog, sitting at attention, ears perked, eyes sharp. He was a lean German Shepherd mix with a white chest and deep-set eyes that seemed to stare straight through the camera. Rusty. That dog had saved Henry's younger brother from the flood in '74. Dragged him out of the swollen creek by the collar, barking until someone heard. The dog had been soaked, bleeding from a cut above the eye, but still had the energy to stand guard over the boy until help arrived. Henry remembered how he cried when Rusty died a few years later, not from old age, but from poison meant for rats that someone had left uncovered. There had been whispers. Some people said the town had grown tired of strays and farm dogs roaming freely. Others believed Rusty had been targeted, but no one ever confessed, and after that, the Doyle family stopped breeding. He set the photo down and picked up another. This one showed 4 pups sitting in a basket, their fur ruffled, eyes wide and innocent. Each had the same markings: broad shoulders, intelligent eyes, a proud but calm posture, Boone stock, strong blood. And then Henry thought of the dog he'd seen just the evening before through the chapel gate. He hadn't come close. He'd only paused at the sidewalk, unsure why he'd taken that route home. He'd seen the girl, Lily, he thought her name was, kneeling beside the retriever, wrapping something in a towel. He'd heard the barking, and he'd caught a glimpse of the mother, thin, broken, but something about her face had stopped him cold. The eyes, that same deep, unwavering stare, not hopeful, not sad, something older, like memory itself had learned how to see. He leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. What if that dog was Rusty's blood? It was possible. The last of the Boone line had been scattered after the ranch sold, but Henry knew a few pups had gone to nearby farms, and dogs, especially smart ones, survived, found a way. He reached into the box and pulled out a final item, a thick leather collar, still scratched with marks from years of use. The name Rusty was pressed into the inside, barely visible now. His fingers traced the letters. If she's one of his, he whispered, then we've all forgotten something sacred. Henry Doyle stood up slowly. His knees popped, his balance wobbled for a second. But he grabbed the photo and the collar, wrapped them in a clean rag, and placed them carefully in a satchel. Then he reached for his hat, an old felt thing with a cracked brim, and headed toward the door. Outside, the evening light had turned gold. Long shadows stretched across the sidewalk as cicadas buzzed their final songs of the day. Henry locked the door behind him and walked toward the Taylor house. His pace was steady, his footsteps slow. He hadn't spoken to Margaret in over a year, not since the church fundraiser. But if anyone would understand what that dog might mean, it was her. Not just as a healer, but as someone who had also lost. As he passed the chapel, he looked toward the front porch. It was empty now. The blanket that had once been draped across the retriever's side was gone. So were the pups. They were inside, resting, waiting. Henry adjusted the satchel over his shoulder and kept walking. The sun rose slower than usual that morning, or maybe it only felt that way to the people of Sundale. It had rained lightly overnight, not enough to leave puddles, but enough to pull the scent of the earth back up through the dry cracks in the sidewalks. The air was thick with silence, the kind that comes just before something changes, though no one could yet say what. The first to speak of it was Eddie Barnes, a 74-year-old barber who hadn't cut hair in months, but still opened his shop every morning to sit by the window and watch nothing happen. He saw Henry Doyle walking up the street, a leather satchel over his shoulder, and something in the old man's posture, his squared shoulders, the hat pulled firm over his brow, told Eddie that whatever was in that bag mattered. Eddie leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Something's come back to Sundale." By the time Henry reached the Taylor house, the sun had just cleared the tops of the trees. He stood in front of the screen door for a moment before knocking. Twice, firm, but unhurried. The sound echoed inside. Margaret appeared at the threshold, her eyes tired but clear. She wore a dark sweater over a flannel nightgown, and her silver hair was pulled back, still damp from a quick rinse. She hadn't expected a visitor so early, especially not Henry Doyle. Her brows lifted slightly, but she said nothing. "I need to show you something," he said simply, his voice a low rasp that hadn't changed in decades. Without a word, Margaret stepped aside. He entered with the slow confidence of someone who had been here before, long ago, back when this house was filled with other voices and the smell of baked bread. He glanced around, noting the kettle on the stove, the fire still flickering in the hearth, and finally his eyes settled on the dog lying near the rug. Luna was awake, barely, but awake. She lay with her head rested on her paws, her eyes drowsy but alert. Her chest rose and fell with steady rhythm now, not desperate like before. Lily was crouched beside her, offering small sips of lukewarm broth from a saucer. Daisy dozed near the fire, and Sonny, ever the restless one, pawed at a corner of the quilt, tugging it gently with his teeth before curling up again. "She's stronger this morning," Margaret said. "Still won't stand long." But she opened her eyes and moved her legs. Henry didn't speak right away. Instead, he removed the satchel from his shoulder, opened it, and pulled out the photograph. The old Boone Ranch crew, with Rusty sitting proudly in the corner. He held it out. Margaret took it, her fingers brushing over the edge of the faded paper. Her eyes narrowed. "That's Boone's barn." He nodded. "And that one?" she asked, pointing to the dog. "Rusty," he said. "Best damn working dog the ranch ever had. Saved my brother from drowning when he was 9. Dragged him through mud, up the creek bank. Wouldn't leave his side." She looked up, her voice softer now. "I remember hearing about that. I kept the collar, too." Henry reached in again, pulled out the old leather strap, cracked and faded, but still bearing the faint pressed name, Rusty. Margaret stepped aside, letting Henry approach the dog. Luna stirred. Her ears perked, and her eyes followed his movement. She tried to sit, failed, but made the effort again. This time her legs shook, her hips wobbled, but she managed to rise just enough to sit on her haunches. Her breathing quickened from the strain, but she remained upright. Henry knelt slowly, creaking with each motion. The collar stayed in his lap. He didn't reach for her. He just looked. And Luna looked back. For a long second, they held each other's gaze. Then, Luna stepped, just once, forward, her paw trembling on the floor. She leaned her head down, and with the lightest movement, she licked Lily's hand before turning her eyes back to Henry. He blinked rapidly and cleared his throat. His voice cracked. "She's got it," he whispered. "The same eyes, that stare, that stillness." "She's Boone's stock?" Margaret asked. "If she is," he said, "she's the last of it." From the side window, movement caught Margaret's eye. Someone across the street had paused on their porch. Mrs. Clement, the retired schoolteacher who lived 2 doors down. She was standing with a plastic container in her hand, eyes fixed on the house. Moments later, a knock came. Lily opened the door. "Just something warm," Mrs. Clement said shyly. "Leftover stew. Might help." Margaret took it with a nod. Less than half an hour later, another knock. This time it was Marlon Webb, the gas station clerk, barely 30, lanky with a soft stutter and a baseball cap that never sat straight on his head. He didn't speak, just handed over a clean fleece blanket and a bag of dog food. After him came Carla May, who once shooed cats from her fence with a broom. She brought an old ceramic water bowl. They didn't come together. They didn't say much. But the town was moving, slow and hesitant, like a hand reaching back after years of not knowing how to touch. Henry remained by Luna's side. He didn't try to put the collar on. He just laid it beside her. "She doesn't need the name," he said. "She's already carrying the memory." And for the first time in decades, Sundale felt like it remembered something important. The sun in Sundale didn't feel as harsh now. It still burned the ground and baked the tin rooftops, but something softer moved with the morning breeze, like an apology left too long unsaid. It came not from the sky, but from the people, and from the hands that had grown still with fear, now returning to motion with purpose. Behind Margaret Taylor's home sat an empty lot. Dry grass had long overtaken its corners, and splintered fence posts leaned like men too tired to stand. It had once been part of a vegetable garden, back when her husband was alive, and the town still traded squash for stories. But it had been untouched for years, only serving as a place stray cats wandered through, or old tools went to rust. Until now. It began with a broom. Margaret, holding her aching back with one hand, and a stiff bristled broom in the other, swept the dust from the cracked stone path that led into the space. Lily followed with a bucket of water and a roll of trash bags. Henry came next, carrying his old toolbox, the handle wrapped in duct tape and memory. "I don't know what we're building yet," Margaret said as she eyed the patch of clearing near the elm tree, "but it should feel like a promise." Lily nodded. "We'll call it something nice." By noon, 3 other townsfolk had joined. There was Daniel Reyes, 35, a quiet man with a kind face, arms strong from lifting car parts at the local salvage yard. He had a habit of chewing on a toothpick and speaking only when necessary. His black hair was cropped short, and he moved with a soft, deliberate grace that surprised people. His father had passed away the year before, and since then Daniel had withdrawn, until today when he saw Lily dragging wood down Main Street and asked, without prompting, "Where to?" Then came Myra Bloom, 62, tall and bird-like, with silver-streaked auburn hair she still wore in a loose braid. She had skin like crumpled linen, always smelled faintly of cloves, and used to run the town's library before it closed. She'd brought nails, 2 old bookshelves, and a sack of carrots she insisted were still good. Her voice was dry, her humor drier, but when she knelt to hammer a board, she smiled for the first time in years. Finally, Charlie Boone showed up, 10 years old, freckled, barefoot, wearing his father's baseball cap backward. He didn't speak, just brought a hammer too large for his hand and began helping Lily arrange the floorboards. Margaret raised a brow, but didn't send him away. Charlie's mother had left town the year before. Since then, he had wandered the streets after school like a ghost in training, but today, he had purpose. They worked through the heat, pausing only for sips of lemonade and to let Luna rest. She lay beneath the elm, her body still recovering, but her eyes alert. Sunny and Daisy remained close, occasionally tumbling together on the blanket spread beneath them. Sunny had started chasing his own tail, awkward and unsure. Daisy, ever gentler, simply followed him and watched. By the end of the second day, a small wooden shelter stood. Simple walls, no insulation, but a roof and 3 open windows. The floor was made of salvaged wood from an old chicken coop. Henry etched a small sun above the front frame with his penknife. Lily painted a sign on a plank of cedar. She wrote in bold, blocky letters, her handwriting still a little shaky. The Haven. She nailed it beside the door. It wasn't fancy, it didn't need to be. It was enough. The next morning, a skinny gray tabby showed up. He had one ear torn and a limp on his right front paw. He sat near the steps of the Haven and didn't move. Lily brought him water and tuna from a can. He stayed. They named him Pockets because he liked to crawl into old jackets laid on the floor and curl into the inner linings as if hiding treasure. 2 days later, a bantam hen with crooked toes appeared, limping across the lot like royalty in exile. Myra fed her bits of carrot, and the bird stayed near the herb planter they'd set beside the wall. She pecked at lavender and made a nest in the shade of the porch. On the 5th day, just before sunset, a young horse trotted in from the scrubland beyond the southern hills. He was thin, ribs showing under sun-dulled hide, and his mane was tangled with burrs. Margaret stepped forward slowly, palm out, and the horse let her touch his muzzle. Daniel built a stall from scrap fencing. The horse stood inside, silent, as if he had finally stopped running. Then came the old donkey. No one knew where he came from. He simply appeared one morning, standing by the fence. His coat was patchy, his eyes half-lidded, and he made no sound. Henry gave him water. Charlie brushed his coat. Lily named him Humphrey. He stayed. Within a week, the Haven wasn't just a shed. It was breathing. It smelled of hay, cedar, soap, and mint. Its walls echoed with soft footsteps, occasional laughter, the rustle of straw, the scratch of pencil on paper. Henry started writing again. In a thick notebook with cracked leather covers, he kept a record of everything. Who arrived, how they were treated, what their eyes looked like. He wrote as if the town needed proof of what was happening, as if memory wasn't enough. Lily added drawings, each dog, cat, hen, and hoof. On a corner of the back wall, she sketched Luna's face in charcoal. She got the eyes just right. No one made speeches. There were no declarations. No newspaper came. But people began to notice. And not just those who helped build it. Rosa Martinez, who used to chase dogs from her garden, brought a bowl of rice. Calvin Moore, the widower with arthritis who hadn't left his porch in months, sent over 2 old wool blankets. Even Sheriff Bill, stiff, skeptical, and heavy-set with sunspots across his neck, dropped by one afternoon and asked if they needed fencing permits. Margaret looked him dead in the eye. "You going to stop us?" He scratched his head. "Didn't say that. Just making sure we're doing this safe." "You could bring nails," Henry added. The sheriff nodded. The next day, he did. Sundale didn't change overnight, but something loosened, something softened. And no one dared to say it aloud, but many knew. It started the day a dying dog chose their chapel steps. The moon hung low over Sundale, casting its silver hush over rooftops and fence posts, softening every edge of the town that once turned its back on stray souls. The gentle hum of cicadas whispered between the trees, and a breeze passed through the elm behind Margaret's house like it remembered something. Inside the cabin, most were already asleep. Lily curled beneath a quilt with a drawing pad still clutched in her hands. Margaret in her rocking chair, glasses resting crooked on her nose, her breath slow and even. But Luna was awake. The old golden retriever, her golden coat now dulled and patchy, rose with effort. Her limbs trembled slightly as she steadied herself, the cool earth beneath her paws grounding what her body could no longer carry with ease. She moved through the doorway, her steps light but deliberate, as if following a map only she could see. The first she visited was Henry. He had fallen asleep at the writing table inside the haven, a candle still burning beside him, his hand draped loosely across an open page. Luna stood beside him for a long moment, her eyes, now fogged with age yet still impossibly deep, resting on the weathered man with his beard speckled gray and white, his flannel shirt hanging loose on a frame that had once thrown hay bales and outrun coyotes. She touched her nose gently to his palm. Henry stirred, just enough to murmur a sound, not quite waking. Then, Luna stepped over to Margaret's porch. The old woman was still in her rocker, her chin now slumped to her chest, her hands folded over her lap. Margaret had changed. Her sharpness had softened, her eyes, once dulled by loss, now flickered with light again. Luna licked her fingers once, just once, and stood there for a moment, as if saying thank you, not for what had been done, but for what had been forgiven. Through the kitchen, through the creaky hallway, Luna moved like a memory, quiet, steady, purposeful. She found Lily curled into a ball on the living room couch, the blanket slipping halfway to the floor. The little girl had drawn something new that day. A family of dogs, 3 small puppies playing beneath a tree, and a 4th dog lying nearby, watching. Luna climbed up slowly, gently placing her head on Lily's knees. Lily stirred. She didn't speak. Her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw Luna looking up at her, something in her face fell still. She didn't cry. She just placed her small hand on Luna's forehead and whispered, "I know." Luna didn't stay long. She stood again, made her way through the back door, her steps slower now. The moonlight lit her path like a stage, each stone and blade of grass gently silvered beneath her feet. She walked past the herb planters, past the empty food bowls, past the quiet breaths of the sleeping animals. Sunny and Daisy lay curled together beneath the elm, their small forms rising and falling in unison. Luna didn't disturb them. She walked a little farther, past the haven, past the tool shed, to the great oak tree at the back of the property. It was the same tree she had first collapsed near, the one whose roots had cradled her broken body when there was no other place left. She lay down. The earth was cool and soft beneath her. The stars flickered like faraway campfires in the dark, and the wind carried the smell of pine, faint and sweet. She closed her eyes, and just before the stillness took her completely, she let out a sound, one soft bark, no louder than a sigh. It drifted up with the breeze into the limbs of the tree and disappeared. The morning came warm and golden, a quiet kindness in the air. Margaret was the first to rise. She opened the back door to fetch fresh herbs and stopped. Henry followed, then Lily, barefoot and clutching her drawing. The others came too. Daniel, Myra, Charlie, Rosa, even the sheriff. No one had called them. They just came, as if summoned by something older than grief. There were no loud sobs, no hysteria, only silence. Henry dug the first shovel of earth, his hands shaking. Daniel took the next, sweat dripping into the collar of his work shirt. Margaret placed a clean white cloth over Luna, folding it gently like a mother tucking in her child. Lily set her drawing beneath Luna's head. Myra brought a carving knife and an old wooden plank. She etched it slowly, carefully. The board read, "Here lies Luna, the one who waited, the one who saved us." The grave was beneath the old oak tree. That afternoon, Lily gathered smooth stones and laid them in a circle around the marker. Daisy sniffed each one, then curled beside it. Sonny sat quietly for a long time before placing his paw on the wooden sign. Later, as dusk returned, Henry lit a lantern and hung it from the lowest branch of the oak. Not as a memorial, as a promise, that Sundale would not forget again. It was early August when the oak tree bloomed. Not just leaves, actual soft white blossoms, tinged faintly with gold, had unfurled along the higher branches. No one could remember the last time it had flowered. Some said it had been 15 years or more, since before the drought. Others whispered it was longer than that, but no one could be sure. What everyone did agree on was this. It happened after Luna passed. Beneath the tree, the wooden plaque remained undisturbed. Smooth stones still formed a perfect circle around it, and every few days, someone would leave something there. A biscuit, a drawing, a scrap of ribbon, sometimes just a hand resting on the earth for a moment longer than usual. The grave became something else, not a place of mourning, but of memory, of renewal. The haven had grown. It was no longer just a small shed behind Margaret's house. With Henry's help and the quiet donations from townsfolk who never admitted aloud they were helping, fences were built, posts reinforced, a roof extended. A second shelter was added, painted sky blue and adorned with paw prints that Lily and the schoolchildren had drawn by hand. A retired carpenter named Samuel Jensen, a burly man in his 60s with a silver beard and a stiff limp from a tractor accident decades ago, donated a workbench and began crafting tiny wooden beds for the smaller animals. He didn't speak much, but the way he smoothed the corners of each plank revealed more than words could say. Inside the haven, the community began to gather, not for meetings or plans, but simply to be. On a typical day, one could find Rosa knitting on a folding chair, while two cats curled at her feet, Daniel trimming hedges in the yard, even though no one asked, and Lily sitting in the dirt, reading out loud to Sunny and Daisy, who had grown fast and healthy, their fur now glossy and clean, their eyes full of the kind of mischief only puppies know. Margaret had changed too. She smiled more now, not wide or often, but in real, unguarded ways. She had taken to keeping a small notebook in her apron and writing down what she called the names of the healed. Whenever an animal recovered, she'd jot a few lines. Date, condition, and a single sentence describing what made it unique. She started writing people too. Henry gave up silence. Rosa stopped drinking. Jensen carved laughter. And herself, Margaret, remembered. Henry, meanwhile, had finished the book. It had started as a few notes in his weathered old notebook, but Lily's encouragement had turned it into something more. The local library, a squat brick building run by a spectacled woman named Fran Bell, who wore her hair in 2 long braids even at age 55, and spoke as if she were always quoting someone wiser, offered to help. She edited the pages with care and suggested the title, The Golden That Stayed. The cover bore a simple sketch of Luna's face, drawn from memory by Lily. The day it was printed, Fran held a small reading at the library. The chairs were mismatched, the lemonade too sweet, but no one minded. That night, the town changed. Not in any obvious way. The roads were still dusty, the mail still late, the same heat buzzed in the air. But something had shifted. People began knocking before entering, leaving water out for stray cats, slowing down at crosswalks even when no one was crossing. Children especially felt it. They came to the haven in groups after school. They brought carrots for the donkey, breadcrumbs for the chickens, and stories to read to Sunny and Daisy, who had become beloved icons of something unnamed but deeply needed. Lily told Luna's story again and again, her voice steady, eyes always shining at the same part. And then Luna laid her head on my knee, and I knew she had chosen us. The tree became a symbol. Children began to draw pictures, dozens of them, crayon sketches of a golden dog surrounded by stars, or a puppy with wings beside a bright moon. They pinned them to the oak with twine and wooden clothespins. When the wind blew, the tree rustled with memories. People said it sounded like a soft bark. Sunny had started sleeping under the oak. Every night, without fail, he'd curl up at the base of the tree, one paw draped over the carved plaque, eyes open until long after moonrise. Daisy would sometimes join, but she preferred the warm quilts in Lily's room. Sunny stayed. Some said he was guarding something, others said he was listening. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind was right and the moon was high, a sound would carry, light, fleeting, not quite echo, not quite voice. A bark, soft, familiar, not asking, not pleading, just reminding that they were loved, that someone had stayed when no one else did. That kindness, once given, doesn't vanish. It roots, it grows, it changes the ground beneath your feet. It makes flowers bloom on trees that had forgotten how. That night, Lily climbed out of bed, bare feet brushing against cold wood. She walked outside and sat next to Sunny under the oak. She didn't say anything. She just sat, her hand resting on his warm fur. When she looked up, the stars were shifting. like they too were leaning in to listen. Sometimes it takes just one forgotten soul, like a golden dog who had every reason to give up, to remind an entire town what it means to care again. Luna didn't speak our language, but her silence carried something divine. In her quiet loyalty, her final bark beneath the oak tree, there was a whisper of something greater, a miracle wrapped in fur. Maybe it wasn't just kindness that made the tree bloom again. Maybe it was grace. So, if you're watching this now and you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, just remember, the smallest act of love can awaken the biggest change. A town can breathe again. A heart can bloom again. Maybe today's miracle is already waiting at your door, in a paw print, in a whisper, in a golden light you didn't expect. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes in kindness. Leave a comment for Luna below. Subscribe if you believe that even the smallest creature can carry God's light. And may the Lord bless every soul who still opens their door to the lost.